All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Enabling Digital with Systems Plus. I'm your host, Amay, and today we have Eric from the Wilmot Cancer Institute. He is the Executive Director of Technology Innovation.
Thank you. Thank you
Welcome,
for having
Eric.
me.
All right. So, Eric, you've had a very interesting career. It would be great to understand uh, what has led to your current role in healthcare IT today, and what does your role encompass
Yeah,
today?
so it's been a pretty unique career, especially for someone in the healthcare space. I started my career out in the outpatient pharmacy here at the University of Rochester Medical Center, which a lot of people don't know because we
Okay.
don't put anywhere. But I did this while I was in college doing a computer science degree.
I did not see that on your LinkedIn, so
Yeah, yeah. I usually there's a couple things that I left out, but I did that while in the computer science degree program, and so I think it's where I first got my first exposure to healthcare, which kind of set up the rest of it. But
hmm
eventually, I graduated and found a job in the pathology department as one of the first computer programming jobs that I had. It's also where I realized that at least back then, so this is over 20 years ago, computer programming as defined by healthcare is a little different than what I was. So, I was a true developer. I could, back end, full stack, and all that kind of stuff. But I think back then, it was more systems configuration is what we would consider it, dealing with the HRs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I kind of used that. And I like to joke that I'm kind of the grandfather of instant electronic eligibility. So before the HRs had all of that ability to do that, I had that up and running for Strong URMC, and that kind of caught the eye of a large software vendor in the United States who ended up offering me a position there. So it's sort of hard because I think the reason that a lot of people don't leave the healthcare space once they're in it is that stability. I mean, there's very rarely like layoffs or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I had a really great mentor who kind of walked me through that and was like encouraging me to go. So I took that job, and it was one of the first of several cross country moves that I did in my career.
Okay.
So I ended up moving down to Florida, and I
All right.
started a job there as a traveling programmer. So I was flying all around the United States 3 times a week.
Traveling
Yeah, travel
programmer.
like
All right. That's
we were
interesting.
entering in different healthcare organizations, attempting to help them with whatever it is that they needed. Um,
And the travel part was you had to be on site because of just like security type
yeah, some
issues,
of it,
or
I don't know that it was necessarily security. Some of it was. I think that people just wanted someone there at the time. I mean, so this is still early in my career,
yeah.
20-ish years ago, maybe 19 years ago. So I don't
Okay.
know, but they definitely wanted to be on site. So I was
Right.
in no exaggeration, probably 40 to 50 of the top institutions in America. It's where I really learned what worked and what didn't. That informed a lot of my
Okay.
later career. But, eventually traveling that much, I mean, it's the little things that get you. Like I was sick a lot because you're in and out of these, these organizations and traveling 3 times a week. It wears on you a little bit. So I ended up taking a job back in New York at the University of Rochester
Okay.
again when one opened up after a few years of that. So then I
Yeah.
ended up back there, but it was great. I mean, there's a reason I've gone back 3 times now because it's a great organization. But I started to realize like I wasn't made for just doing a singular development job. After traveling all over the place, I wanted to be more innovative and all that kind of stuff. And healthcare IT in general, at least as like EHRs go and those things, isn't really that space. So while I was working
hmm
there, I decided that it might also be interesting to try a different industry. So I went back and got a
Okay.
cybersecurity degree. And that was the third cross country trip. I ended up taking a job down in Louisiana this time. Um, And I was lucky and privileged, I guess, that I could start over because at that point I was, in senior roles and I had some supervisory capacity as a
Right.
developer. But I started over as an analyst in cybersecurity space and eventually worked my way up to leading teams and doing penetration testing all over the United States again, which was really fun because you're legally breaking into
Yeah,
buildings and like hacking people and all that kind of stuff, those engagements. But much the way that yeah,
that's
much the
cool.
way that it got old traveling for as a programmer, that also gets really really challenging as well. So I
So were you a
Yeah,
traveling
yeah,
hacker?
that was
Is
it was a lot of fun,
essentially,
and I saw a
yeah,
lot of crazy things. I learned a lot too, and that I still hold today. But eventually, at that point, like I knew what I wanted to do. So now we're kind of mid-career or to career, and I ended up
yeah.
having the great opportunity to come back to when Wilmot opened a position, and after I met with all the leadership there, they really I mean, I think it was exactly what I wanted. I could be innovative, but I also could make an impact on the community because I realized that's sort of a big aspect of what I wanted to do as well. So in cancer, in the cancer space,
Hmm.
this technology can do so much.
For
So
sure.
that's sort of how I got to here.
Okay. So super interesting, and part of what you mentioned was during your first traveling stint, working in healthcare, there was you saw a lot of organizations and you saw what
Mhm.
worked and what didn't work. And I know you have some opinions today on, as healthcare IT, where it is
Mhm.
today, where it should be, how should people be operating, the level of innovation, some of those things. It would be great if you could share your thoughts on just the overall space today and where some of the gaps are and where you
Yeah,
think
I
there's
don't think this would
potential.
be too controversial of a statement, but I think healthcare technology in general is roughly 10 years behind industry counterparts and whatever. I think there's some valid reasons for that, and then some reasons that are a little bit more challenging. I think like valid reasons in the gap. You with the advent of AI, everything's AI right now, right? Um, there's some ethical concerns in healthcare, like how to use that and how to
For
do those
sure.
things. So they slow that roll down where industry can kind of steamroll forward. But from a gap perspective, I really think that, and I talk a lot about this, but I really think that the gap is really foundational, and that's what people aren't necessarily recognizing because I think there might be a lot of, I guess, what's called toxic positivity around this. We have severe data
Okay.
problems in healthcare, data interoperability problems. We have fire
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but there's a reason and this would be hours of conversation if we were to go into that is not widespread adopted. But I think that we haven't really figured out in mass a lot of the data issues, curation, validation, and all of that in healthcare. And I think what happens is
Hmm.
um, because of these grant mechanisms that some places have, because of whatever, look, they're working on AI, they're working on blockchain, they're working on whatever, VR, but but they're working on it sort of with a broken foot, um, because that
Yeah.
foundation,
There's no
yeah. So I
foundation.
think,
Yeah.
and I think that we kind of ignore that. Well, not everyone, obviously, but like I think it's often overlooked. But I think that's probably the biggest gap right now that I see.
Right. And so one of the things you have said is easy
Mhm.
access to data has been a problem. The foundations are fundamentally not there, and because of that,
Mhm.
everything just gets delayed. A simple process may take 3 to 5 days when it could
Absolutely.
take a day. Um, what are some of the innovations you and your team are pioneering at Wilmot to solve
Yeah,
some of these
so because of
problems?
everything I just mentioned, and because of that breadth of experience that I saw, like I came into this with an idea of what we would need to do to prevent that, at least internally. This only applies to to us because you would need national level is different. But
Right.
we built a data platform system we called Hyperion, and the general idea of that was to
Hmm.
correct some of the foundational issues. so that we could more rapidly develop and iterate after that was all set. And the way that we did that was to
Okay.
sort of identify some of the core gaps in that foundation. One of them being oftentimes IT groups don't have the staffing and they lack the funding to
For
to
sure.
accomplish all of the
Yeah.
goals. And if you have, so University of Rochester is something like 40,000, I probably overstated, 35, 40,000 employees. Um, you have a
Yeah.
lot of requests coming in, and Wilmot itself has several thousand, and all that kind of stuff is part of it. So you have to have some mechanism that you can lower the skill floor low enough that you can get this data, these reports, these complex analytics back out to the user in a reasonable time frame. Less than a day, hopefully.
Hmm.
And so we did that by semantically redefining everything that was coming into the system from the EHR, from the clinical trial systems, because that's sort of the other problem too. You have 30 disparate systems all over the place that don't talk to each other and
Right.
all these things. So it took a year or so to do this. We did it with
At
yeah,
just a
yeah.
year?
Yeah,
That's
thank you.
quick.
Yeah, we worked pretty. There were a lot of nights doing this too, but we redefined it all into really easy to define terms. So one of the examples I love to use is just a simple like poll of disease and age or whatever in the most common
Yeah.
EHR on the market would take you're crossing 12 tables and it's all over the place that the things aren't named
Right.
appropriately. In our system, it's like a one liner. So you don't necessarily have to even know
Right.
healthcare to deal with that. And that lowered the skill floor enough where now we can sort of focus on what matters more, getting, actionable intelligence and all that kind of stuff out.
And so how big was your team when you were building out like
Yeah. So
Hyperion?
when I started, I was employee one on the team, and then we
Okay.
started building out. So I would say we did it with about 4 FTs that first year. Um, Yeah, they
Oh,
were
that's
very
impressive. Right.
the team's brilliant and they're very dedicated. So we built it out with that, and then there were some iterations. Obviously, it was up in the first year, but it's not what it is
Yeah,
today. I mean that required more, but
for sure.
yeah, eventually we now have 12.
And so is Hyperion based off some of the big sort of cloud providers or some infrastructure that's out there, or is it because you're in healthcare, or you can't use some of the probably common
Mhm.
technology that we use in other enterprises, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that you faced while
Yeah,
doing
so
this?
it's completely custom. The data model is completely custom. The base
Okay.
layer, the Esperanto layer, whatever you want to call it, is is custom. I think that was one of the biggest challenges, though, because we originally had built this with an MS SQL system and all that kind of stuff. We were putting it in.
Okay. Right. So like hosted on-prem in your data center and
Yeah,
all that fun
and
stuff.
we were able to expand that technology quite a bit. So the way that we had originally done it was on very little powered equipment. I mean, I think we had spent $2,000 total on this on-prem
Yeah.
equipment. So we had to find a way to import
Right.
billions of lines of data off that equipment originally. And the way that we did
Yeah.
it, we spent a lot of time. We coded a multi-threaded, multi-process like
Okay.
approach with like upsert routines and all these things were going on to try and do that. Now the equipment's quite a bit larger, but it worked. It worked, and
Right.
it was able to keep things up to date and near real time. Um,
And still on-prem managed
so Yeah,
in the data
it's
center.
still on-prem, although we can burst to the cloud now. So we do have a cloud, and the reason for that
Okay.
is genomics. So healthcare data, people often think is big data, but it's really not unless you're getting into genomics and stuff like that. You're
All right.
talking, a few billion rows, but like on-prem equipment can handle that. When you get into the genomics and
Yeah,
the
for
genome
sure.
sequencing and
Right.
stuff, now you're talking terabytes a day. So now then we needed, and that's why we
Yeah, yeah.
switched to be able to burst to the cloud platforms for that kind of stuff. But yeah, most of it's still
Okay.
on-prem.
All right, and so you have Hyperion, it's set up, you've got that good foundation, like you said, and now you get to do some of the more fun stuff, which is visualizing it and then maybe, attacking use cases. And I believe you've built a
Mhm.
system called Canvas around that. Can you sort of help us learn
Yeah.
more about it?
So now that that foundation is done, we and that's how we've been able to push out so much because it's so easy to code in it. So one of the systems was Canvas. It was a geospatial um, analytical system that would allow any user to go in there and look up anything about our patient base internally. And if it was internal, then it has to be someone cleared for
Okay.
PHI. Or New York State's registry, which we also had imported. So all the incidence rates, like New York statewide and all that kind of stuff. They could select
Hmm.
any demographic, any disease they wanted, if these people have been on clinical trials or the mortality rates, all that
Yeah.
stuff, and then plot those on a map. And that kind of led way to quite a few different discoveries. One being around lung cancer in a certain region here in upstate New York, where
Okay.
there seemed to be some disparity going on. But they used that data and that app to open a multi-million-dollar facility in that area to try to help support whatever was going on there. So it's been used. That technology
Okay.
specifically has been used in many, many different research ways. So it's
That's
pretty,
cool.
yeah, it's pretty powerful.
And is it the same four FTEs that built this from
No,
scratch,
now we have
or?
12. Although I would say Canvas
All right.
itself was built by one very brilliant developer and obviously support.
I need to meet these people. Like, who
Well,
are these
they're
guys?
all they're all brilliant. I constantly joke that they're all giving me imposter syndrome. So even though I've been developing for 20 years.
Yeah. Oh man, like this is like honestly phenomenal, right? Like doing some of this stuff in a year, you don't hear that, and then one guy building some of this, which is
Mhm.
providing tremendous value. That's awesome. One of the things I did notice about your team when I was sort of doing my research was and you've posted about this, is you have
Yeah.
like a head of product, which
Mhm.
you don't see, right? You don't see that. We work with a lot of IT teams today. I would love if there's more sort
Yeah.
of product people in those spaces, but you don't see it. So what what led you to hire that person and have that person in your team and realize the importance of
Yeah,
it?
so this comes from that breadth of experience too. He was actually, I think, the third hire I did, or fourth maybe, somewhere around there. He was very early on.
Okay.
I think that a lot of our success is attributed to a few items, this being one of them. I think that anytime that, especially in the healthcare space, where you do have thin budgets and you do need to hire consulting and you do need to do all these things,
Yeah.
and priorities are shifting sometimes daily, you need someone, you need a head of product, you need someone that is overseeing that.
Right.
Um, Especially with some of the leadership style that we use too. We're not a command and control leadership style, so we have to be sure about.
Hmm.
And we're running, 6 different projects all at the same time, and all these things. So someone has to be there to sort of keep me in check as well, to not go overboard, and
Yeah.
that's product. Also someone who can go out there and interact with the different clients, figure out the scoping so the developers can sort of focus on exactly what
Yeah.
they need to do, which is also how we're sort of doing this with, like how Canvas could be built with one. We already had a pretty clear scope for that.
Yeah.
He had it already designed and all that kind of stuff. So um,
Hmm.
I think it's a huge success part of what we've done, and I would really recommend that most people, if you're going to be in the technology innovation space within healthcare,
Yeah.
should consider getting
Yeah.
some kind of product manager.
I mean, I think in not
Yeah,
just healthcare, right? Like I think a lot of the industries, there's fundamentally a disconnect between the technology team and the business oftentimes, and having somebody to help bridge that and then just like manage scope and prioritize things is important. Otherwise, you just get too many moving threads at once and
yeah, it's
nothing ever
gold.
gets
It,
done.
it really is. It's very helpful. We also have the added
Yeah.
benefit though of My co-director is a practicing oncologist. So we have a couple,
Okay.
and the product manager as well had 30 years of bench research. So we have between both of them, we do
All
have
right.
sort of that bridge, which has helped this team immensely too, because I don't always
Yeah.
understand whatever clinical aspect they're telling me is. And it's very helpful to have two people, especially like my co-director who's also a brilliant data scientist,
Yeah.
just brilliant in general. But having both of them, it really helps. It really does.
And so you built Canvas, which was of immense value, but from what I understand, 2D was not enough, right? And you said, I need one FT to build me something now. Next amazing engineer to come and build things in
Yeah.
3D, right?
You're gonna hate this, but it was one FT. So
Of course it
it's
was.
not always the case with all of our projects, but like the BMT
All
suite
right.
going on has 4 FTs on it right now. But like, yes, this one was one. Um, yeah, no. So I think the idea was with VR technology, with AR technology. Um, you can do a lot, and I don't think VR AR will ever obviously replace like traditional methods, but it's meant to
Yeah.
enhance it in certain ways. There's a few things that I think it really enhances. One, in that geospatial suite, um, you theoretically could code in some kind of like of collaboration in there, but to do this in VR is really at another level than 2D. So being able to have a researcher, which does happen in California and then in one in New York or
Yeah.
across the world, it doesn't really matter, both in the same geospatial suite, moving that same map around and plotting, like, I think we have a cancer problem, in the southern tier or something. That is way more powerful,
Okay.
I think, than doing that in 2D. It's just not as easy because you'd have like a Google Docs style, like people could see things, which is really great for like text.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with stuff like geospatial analysis, I think that's quite a value added over. The other part of it is with VR, our current Canvas suite, you can have multiple maps side by side to compare and whatever, but
For
you only have
sure.
so
Yeah.
much screen space to deal with. In VR, your viewpoint is much
Yeah.
larger, so we're able to bring not just the basic functionality of Canvas in, but you could theoretically then bring in a lot of the analytics and have that side by side and stuff like that, all in that environment.
Yeah.
I think the expanded view and what you can show and how you can show it is actually quite a bit more powerful in VR.
And so, yeah, do you have sort of use cases where you're taking advantage of that, if essentially that third dimension, right? That you can visualize data along?
We do. It's not in production yet. We had
Okay.
they're changing priorities and whatever. We had planned to go back to it, and we will. It does work. Um, there are a few we have to. There are a few like analytic items that need to be added in, and combining of certain systems because
Yeah,
VR obviously is a different coding mechanism as well. Um, so yeah,
for
there's a bunch
sure.
of use cases for it, but
And then designing for it, were you able to like, manage designing for it? Was it completely different? I mean, I can barely think in
yeah,
3D,
so
but
I think that's it. So
let's.
as a developer in healthcare, I can tell you there's very little that you could ask me or tell me that I probably haven't seen in some way or couldn't look up. This is a
Yeah.
bit different, though. I would say that from my perspective, the reason it's different is because you still have that development layer when you're coding in VR and AR, the traditional coding.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the
Mm-hmm.
spatial awareness layer because you're in 3D. And I don't think I
Yeah.
really have that, at least internally. But
You have to like imagine it, I guess, right? Like, there's no way for you to say like this, because you would still design or potentially put it out in
yeah.
2D, and then somehow just have to imagine how it
Yeah, and
works
then you have
in
to have the
3D.
math to make that work, and all the stuff that our one FT
Yeah.
did. But they think that way already, and I think that it's not that I couldn't do it, but I think people are if you're going to go down that road, you kind of do need someone that thinks that way, and it could just be because I never learned that way.
Yeah.
Like my coding path is C,
maybe.
C++, Python, whatever. And I just, I didn't
Yeah,
think in those 3D terms, but yeah, it's definitely a different build for sure.
for sure. And you mentioned it's not just that you guys are building VR, but there's like
Mhm.
collaborative VR, which is like, I mean, I want to meet this FTE of
Well, we
yours.
can set
Like,
up meetings. Yeah.
um, but I guess, in general, let's say we get very close near real-time collaboration in the AR, VR space over the next years, which I think is possible with Apple,
Yeah.
launching Vision Pro and pushing that, hopefully, further down. Um, w- like, how do you see this benefiting healthcare as an
Yeah.
industry?
I think I think like I kind of had mentioned that I don't think it'll ever replace fully, but I think that um, those collaborations are really huge. There's also that whole like training for surgeries and stuff that VR has always done, which is already amazing. But I think people really haven't gotten
Yeah,
into that data space with VR AR yet. I think that's where we could benefit the most. I mean, we definitely know that the use cases and it's in reality for training and those mechanisms, but I don't think really people have thought through a lot of that data collaboration or anything like that. I mean, you could also look at it from the
yeah,
standpoint of identifying security vulnerabilities. You could look at it from. I think one of the things that you could take a look at is genomics. Having those large data
okay,
sets there, visually color coded, whatever, are going to be easier in VR as well. So I
yeah,
think that's sort of the future. Like I said, probably it won't fully replace anything, obviously, but um, there's a lot of benefit.
yeah. All right, and maybe looking
Mhm.
outside of data, at the industry in general, what are some of the core trends you see over the next 5 years between, of
Mhm.
course, there's AI, there's VR, but anything else?
Um, I really hope that people get to those foundational layers, and that's not really a glamorous answer.
Yeah.
But
No, I mean, but it's reality, right?
yeah,
And like
I
people need
think to
to,
really get to these more glamorous things that people really should be focusing on the data, but they're not. And I think some of the things that I'm interested in for the future, the 5 years, are CRDTs, stuff like that. Sort of because
okay,
I think blockchain, for example, I was really interested in that for a while, but I think
for sure.
that there's
Yeah.
just too much hesitation around that because of crypto, even though it's not the same of what we were putting.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
back up
people don't
again.
trust it. People
Yeah.
whatever, but I think CRDTs as a data type kind of sort of accomplish the same goals there. So I'm interested in that. I think AI. I mean, obviously that's going to be. I mean, I don't think we're going to stop
Huge.
hearing about that for anytime soon.
Yeah, but like you said, I think from a like proprietary security perspective, you don't want to send your data
Right.
necessarily outside. So if you want to build your own models inside, you need those foundational layers, which a lot of companies, I mean, they just don't have.
Yeah,
And
and in healthcare, you
you
also
know,
need clean data. And do you trust the
yeah,
model if your data with what your data looks like? I mean, like internally, we've taken a lot of steps to clean data, but I mean, what if most institutions, the race ethnicity data is very bad, stuff like that. So
yeah.
there's a lot of concern with AI, I think, at least internally.
All right. I think I may have lost you for those last like
Oh,
10 seconds. Might have been me.
yep.
Um, but I think what you were saying was the in a lot of those institutions, the data was
Mhm.
really bad in general. Um, is there, I guess, if anybody in healthcare today wanted to go through this data transformation, any recommendations based on your own learnings, and then how do they continue to
Mhm.
keep data clean, which is impossible, but like what are some of the practices they can put in place to ensure, this, they don't land up back in this messy data situation a
Yeah,
few
I
years
you
from
know
now.
I think we tackled this in another way as well. I didn't mention it, but we built in off thousands and thousands of lines of data validation scripts. So you got to be careful. Like you can't
Right.
automatically fix things, but the idea would be to proactively flag people if something looks off, so that it can be corrected very quickly. And there's many
Yeah.
ways that you can do that that the EHR really should be doing, but they're not. Um, we have access to, I think we're at 90 something interfaces now, but things like the registries or
Okay.
the clinical trial systems or whatever it is that if a if a name and a race and a gender and an ethnicity gets entered and it's different from the clinical trial system, you got some problem. One system or the other. One would think the clinical trial system is correct because that's the more audited one, but you never know. So you should be flagging those for someone to ask the patient or to follow up on. There's things like
Uh-huh.
address information. So because we do so much with Canvas and geocoding, those addresses have to
Yeah.
be right because we're doing social determinants of health off that. We're doing all these things. So we're also plugged into the Census Bureau and other places. So if address gets entered immediately into Epic,
Okay.
we know if it's a valid address or not. Even if they flipped a letter or something,
Okay.
that's fine. But if the address just doesn't exist, maybe it's a new address or whatever. But yeah, so I think it's really important to have whatever you're doing, a lot of those validation type scripts and routines built to kind of try to keep it clean. Although it's, like you said, sort of impossible. You're just trying the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
try to be as good as we can. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Eric, for joining and
Yeah. Thank you so
appreciate the
much.
time.